Alright, so what's going on, guys? It's your boy Nistro here, and we're back. I know I've been away for a while. It's been about a month since I posted my last video, and it's because I've been away from home for literally about 4 weeks. So it's very difficult for me to make videos, and I got back just in time to witness the Elite Championship run of Dinkabui on stream. I saw from like top 16 all the way to the final round, and it was just interesting to see how people struggled against Fire King. I'm not saying Dinkabui didn't deserve the win, because this guy, he's an elite player. He topped with Prank Kids when people thought they were dead. He topped with Pearly last year during like full power Snake Eyes. So this is a player that knows his shit. He was able to take Fire King and maneuver it through the format simply because I think 9 times out of 10 he was just outplaying the opponent. He was thinking ahead. He was thinking about the bigger picture more often than not. And even if it looked like he was going at some kind of a deficit or he was losing in a certain scenario, he was able to turn those situations around into his favor, simply because Fire King as an engine has possibly the best grind game in Yu-Gi-Oh at the moment. It's just kind of insane how much the deck can do, even inside a very simplified game state. I also think because this deck has been out of the meta for a few months, people maybe who took a break and came back, or people who maybe haven't played the deck in a while, have probably forgotten all the smaller interactions and all the kind of theory towards beating this deck, because it wasn't really that popular post Rage of the Abyss. It was like people were still on Snake Eye Azamina rather than Fire King Azamina, so it wasn't like it was the most popular deck even when it had basically full power with Azamina and Sinful Spoils and everything going for it. So even then, it's like you may not have even had exposure to the deck post Ulcanix coming out. And I think that's one of the reasons why this deck was able to do so well at such a high competitive level. It's because people probably just didn't know how to maneuver through some of its situations and how to beat it, because it doesn't really lose hard to Ryzeal. If anything, Ryzeal kind of helps the deck, right? Because Detonator being Ryzeal's main interruption, especially now that, I don't want to say now, but it does seem like more people are on pure builds of Ryzeal rather than Ryzeal Fiendsmith, or less people are on Ryzeal Fiendsmith than I thought there would be, right? So there, even though there's still a lot of Ryzeal within the mix, it's like it's not dominated by Fiendsmith. It seems to be somewhat of an even split between like pure and Fiendsmith variants. And against boards that only end on a detonator, Fire King is not scared at all to play, because there's very little a detonator can do to threaten Fire King. It's kind of an uphill battle for Ryzeal, especially once Fire King sets up their little gameplay loop and they're able to just go off and go through the Garunixes, the Kirins, and the Ulcanix, and bring back Arvada and things of that nature. Multiple copies of your Princess, your Garunix, just so that you're not banishing everything. Double Typhon seemed to work pretty well for him, because it turned some of his grind games into better scenarios for him. And since Garunix has 2700 attack normally and doesn't really have an effect on field, Typhon doesn't hurt him at all, and instead it only hinders the opponent. All of his monsters have less than 3000 attack, and they all have pretty impactful effects on field and in graveyard. So it's really easy to see how a deck like this could slip through the cracks if piloted by the right person, even with access to something like Dominus Impulse that not a lot of decks other than Malice have access to this format. It kind of gave him something of an advantage into certain matchups where he can just resolve this card and not be hindered at all with his engine or with his grind game. It also did kind of, he also did get a bit lucky. I think it's a mix. There's a small bit of luck in there, I think, with the amount of skill that Dinkabui showed. That's why I don't think this result will be easily replicated. I don't think Fire King is going to just start topping left and right, especially since a lot of, with the price point of the deck needing these staples, Impulse, Fuelos, and Ulcanix now getting bought out, just insane amount of technical knowledge that you need to pilot a deck like this properly. It's gonna take a lot for people to like, if you go back to that top 4 round where time was starting to run out and his opponent just started playing extremely fast to the point where he was misplaying, he was forgetting what was in his deck, he was, you know, he wasn't thinking his lines through, simply for the which, you know, is respectable for the sake of not losing or not like abusing the time rules, or not like not wanting to win in time or because of time. But that also kind of cost him the game, because now it's like he got to a point where he was making plays assuming he still had gas, and then he ran out of gas. And that, I think, could have been mitigated if he played a little slower. But if he played any slower, there's a high possibility that the Mermail player would have won in time. So it's a little sad to see, but it was also such a respectable way to finish the game or finish a tournament run that I don't think he could be mad about, you know, about it. Not sure if he would have taken it to first place with Mermail into Malice, especially since Malice is on Shifter. And I think Malice drew Shifter one of those games too. Not sure, but it does kind of go to show that, like, sometimes this game does, you know, isn't, you can mitigate how much luck is a factor, but luck will still always be a factor when it comes to a game like this. Again, shout outs to Dinkabui for the amazing Fire King run. He's probably inspired a lot of players to pick up this deck, but I feel like the Blue Eye structure deck is going to kind of outshine this in like the upcoming YCSs or events, because more people are going to be playing Blue Eyes due to its you know, nostalgia. Now, it's really funny that if you look at YCS Orlando results and you look at the pie chart, it is like almost completely dominated by Ryzeal and Malice. There's a sliver of, you know, Rogue and, you know, alternative engines here, but it's pretty much entirely Ryzeal and Malice. I consider Mitsurugi a Malice, I consider Mitsurugi a Ryzeal deck because nobody's playing Mitsurugi pure, nobody's playing Mitsurugi with Ogdoadic. All of the people who are topping with Mitsurugi are using Ryzeal as an engine in their list. So I basically consider it the same thing. To me, it's kind of like when we were in Fire format and you saw Fire King topping and you saw Rescue Ace topping, and it's like, to me personally, all that counts as Fire. I don't count it as like a different deck because they're still all using the same engine, if that makes sense. So if you take the Ryzeal and the Mitsurugi together, that's 36 out of 64 of the top slots, and that's really close to 60%. It's like 55 or 56 or so, but that's really close to 60%, which is essentially a tier 0 format, essentially, right? And then Malice really being the only thing that's stopping it from being tier 0. And then you come back to Birmingham, and now you're seeing a better, like, you're seeing more decks take up part of the pie, right? You're seeing Crystron over here. You're seeing Memento over here from having no slots in the top of YCS Orlando to having 5 people make it to the top 64 with Memento in a 2,000 person event, over 2,000 person event. 3 of them being in top 16. Now, yes, Fiendsmith does help the deck a lot, right? Because you know, Engraver is just, it's just too easy to make, you know, Moon and go into Engraver and either make a Desiree or a Caesar or something. But it's, he's playing the Cleansmith variant here, right? So they're not using the full like Lacrima, Lurie, Tract. It's literally just an Engraver, which means like they are not being carried by the Fiendsmith engine. They're simply using it as an end piece to whatever board that they make, which I think is really which is really just a testament to how strong Memento can be. The fact that it doesn't need to fully rely on the Fiendsmith engine to do what it needs to do. Like, the access to Fiendsmith sequence makes fusion summoning cards like Baphomet, and I think it's only Baphomet that they summon. They don't use Air Leader, surprisingly, but you know, Baphomet is a really good card for them because they can mill the Diabells, they can mill Engine, they can mill a bunch of stuff with this card, and then they can revive it back on the follow-up turn somehow. Don't ask me how, because I'm not a big Memento guy, but it is just interesting to see how the deck operates now that it's at full power, and the fact that like it's doing so well in Europe compared to here in America. I just think, I'm not sure if Europe is just more prone to letting rogue decks top their events because, you know, Jessica Robinson took over you know, with plants multiple events, and you know, now we're seeing like Fire King take the event. I'm not sure if this is just a Europe thing or if this means that we should be looking more at Memento as a viable option. I mean, if you cut Ryzeal and Malice down a tier, like for example, you took Shifter out of Malice and you took, let's say, the accessibility of Fiendsmith or their consistency out of Ryzeal, is there potential for Memento to do better as a deck? And I think that's something that should be explored. Maybe once we get a ban list, and maybe once Memento gets some reprints, it could possibly be one of the more represented decks because it may become more budget from where it is right now. White Forest also getting a top here is really interesting because in TCG, White Forest has not been doing well at the YCSs, but in regionals it's been getting tops for the past few weeks since Supreme Darkness came out, and in OCG it was pretty much like up there with as like a third place after Malice and Ryzeal, or maybe fourth place because Blue Eyes is there too, but it was pretty up there. And to see it not do well at big events like YCS Orlando was kind of saddening, because it's like, it seems like this deck has a lot of potential, but like nobody's really taking it to events because there are just better decks out there. But it is nice to see that it can top 8 a YCS if, you know, given the opportunity. It takes a lot of theory, and you know, I've been helping a friend build his White Forest deck, so I've kind of gotten familiar with some of the cards and some of the deck building aspects to it. So the fact that like everybody's taking a board breaker approach to this format now with like Metatronus is kind of interesting. In his deck profile, he was talking about how Black Goat Laughs, when you send this card for cost, you can immediately use its effect to then shut down certain cards your opponent controls, or if you send it for cost going first, and you can either add it back with the Diabell, or you can just leave it in graveyard and banish it as an interruption. So this is actually a really good card for White Forest as an engine, because it allows White Forest to basically combo off, because this deck doesn't have many one card combos. It's like Sylvie would be the closest thing to a one card combo that you can consider, and even then she, you know, her one card combo isn't really the full setup. It's just like a half-baked combo. So that's why Black Goat Laughs can work really well, because you need to send spell and trap cards, and if you're not drawing the engine, which you're playing very little of because you don't want to brick on them, I think Black Goat Laughs is a good concession, or a good like compromise for that. Also, the new Elzat being counted as an Azamina allows the Azamina engine to work really well in this deck. Some people are kind of debating how many Witch you should play, because in Fire you could play one Witch and not really care. In this deck, because you need those extenders, because everything is 2 card or more combo essentially, I think playing triple Witch makes sense. I'm a little surprised that, you know, with how many extenders he needs, 45 cards was what he decided to go for in his list. But you look at the list and it's like, I don't think I'd cut anything from this list. Like, you're already on a single Stellar, and a Stellar is the best one starter in the deck, but because its line is so vulnerable to hand traps, you don't want to actually start with it. You actually want to start with things like, you know, Engraver and Diabellstar, so that you can kind of make smaller pushes that bait out hand traps, and then go into your main line with either Sylvia, Stellar, or Elzat, depending on how you sequence it. And because this deck doesn't do so well going second, that's why you see a more hybrid approach to hand traps and board breakers, which is kind of the same theory I have with Goblin Biker. It's like low impact hand traps don't do shit into a lot of decks this format. So instead, you know, that's why I go for more like Droplet, Imperm, you know, cards that are good both going first and second, Tactics, and now Metaltronus is being, you know, put on that list. And yeah, I think that's a good approach for White Forest as well. You look at the extra deck, Agnumde is really interesting here because if you go into the combo line, you basically go Moon into Desiree, and then you link off the Desiree to make the Agnumde, and then you equip Agnumde in sequence. And then because Agnumde is a equip spell, you can send it to continue activating your White Forest spells and monster effects, because you can just send it to the graveyard as a spell and trap card. And yeah, it's a very simple setup, but it works really well because you have a lot of control over what you can do. And then even cards like Azamin Afs, however you would pronounce that, this is a card like this, and the quick play spell are two cards that are like very player preference, and it's interesting to see him run both of them. This one mostly because it's searchable, one, and two because it can actually make a Guardian Chimera on the opponent's turn, which is pretty strong. And then Afs because it counts the number of fusions and synchros in your graveyard as well as on your field. You can end up negating or dark rulering basically a whole field of cards. Even if you get Nibiru, if you get interrupted, this card can still be pretty impactful just because of how much it can do at once. And yeah, we're playing Detonator for the Metaltronus. We're playing Chirozzo because it's a good way to combo with Diabellstar. And I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory here. So yeah, it was just interesting to see this deck do so well in such a large event because it's mostly only been topping regionals. And it's good to see that the deck has a little bit of grit to be able to top a YCS. Obviously, this is its first YCS top, I believe, post Supreme Darkness. Feel free to prove me wrong on that if you guys have seen other lists, but from what I remember, I don't think it's topped a YCS before this post Supreme Darkness, and it's only done well in OCG. So this may be a good roadmap for the deck moving forward, assuming Fiendsmith doesn't get hit next list, because it probably will. But we'll get into that at some point later. Mermail is surprisingly doing a lot better than I thought it would post Supreme Darkness. I guess this new Poseidra is a lot better for the deck than I thought it was. I just thought it was more of the same, but it turns out it's actually really good. And maybe I need to do some more research into this deck. I mean, Cole Camp, like, this has been such a stupid card for God knows how long. Like, from Edison format all the way till now, this has been a stupid card. There just hasn't always been a deck to utilize it. And then Barrier Statue being allowed to play this card is this card's probably hit worthy if we're being real, but we'll see. Also, Access to Dominus Impulse goes pretty hard, so there's a lot of strengths that this deck has, even with its limitations to water. It really doesn't care. And the last deck I wanted to go through, I think it was this guy right here. This guy started utilizing Traptrix in his Ryzeal deck, simply because Rafflesia, which is something that I thought was really straightforward and that people were going to start doing like as soon as Ryzeal came out. I thought everyone was going to be on Rafflesia like frame one, but apparently not. So Rafflesia actually can mill the Ryzeal Plasma Hole because it's a whole trap card, and it essentially because Rafflesia mills for cost, basically you can turn Plasma Hole into a instant rank 4, meaning that you can turn like Rafflesia and Duo Drive into Eclipse Twins to dodge stuff like Imperm using Rafflesia. So Rafflesia can not only stop your monster hand traps like Veiler, Ash Blossom, or Nib thanks to Gravedigger's Trap Hole, but now it can also stop Imperm in this deck thanks to Ryzeal Plasma Hole and the existence of Eclipse Twins if you make this before you make your Duo Drive. It's essentially like a better way of making... Basically, you don't have to waste a Detonator pop going into this, or before you go into Duo Drive. Instead, you can sit on Rafflesia, and then you can go Eclipse Twins, and then once Eclipse Twins is sent to the graveyard, you can revive Rafflesia with the Eclipse Twins on it, and that can mill the Trap Hole Nightmare. So it's interesting to see the Ryzeal deck innovate, even though it's still 90% Ryzeal. There's no real main deck Traptrix here except for Mermail. Otherwise, it's pretty standard, and you know, with the Metatronus, Cycle Reader is interesting, but it's really only here because Fiendsmith exists, and Inscription is here as a cold wave for Malice and, you know, graveyard decks like Mermail and Fiendsmith, I guess, too. But yeah, I'm just really liking the innovation in this list, and it's something different from what you see normally. So I just wanted to showcase it before I finished the video. But yeah, that was everything I found interesting or unique about YCS Birmingham. I don't really care too much about Crystron. I know it's here. I don't care too much about it, but I guess I'll look at it anyway. It just made top 64. The price, like, I can't even call this deck a budget deck anymore because Citri's hitting fucking price going to the moon. This guy's like $5 or $6. I guess it's still relatively budget compared to other decks this format, especially since there's no Fuelos in here, so it's probably the most budget meta deck you can have. But yeah, I'm still not the biggest fan of this deck yet. Maybe after I do some playtesting with it, I'd probably like it a little better. I do like that basically the continuous spell is a one card Cyber Dragon Infinity without using your normal summon. And they also do utilize Clockwork Knight, even though they don't use it to search the continuous spell Clockwork Knight. I do like that it's in the list. And yeah, otherwise it's like, if it just feels like a weaker version of other decks in the format. It, you know, sometimes that kind of just happens. But if you want to play Yu-Gi-Oh on a budget, I guess this would be the closest budget deck you can have to being meta. Because I don't count Fire King because you need that triple impulse, triple Fuelos, right? Whereas this deck, I guess it has enough gas and enough grind game to stand on its own 2 feet. So yeah, that's it. That was YCS Birmingham and a little bit of YCS Orlando. Let me know what you guys think about these events in the comment section below. Let me know if there's any other considerations or any other lessons you think we should take from these events. And I'll see you guys in the next one.